Trump is unique. I think he has somehow, some way, and I don't understand it, but he has, almost gotten in these people's brains and just convinced them that almost like he's the savior of the nation. And I'm going to tell you, a lot of his followers really believe that.
Welcome to the Ken Harbaugh Show. I've got Senator Mark Pryor on today, former Democratic senator from Arkansas. It's hard to believe, Senator, that just a decade ago, places like Arkansas, and I say this as a kid who grew up in Alabama, were electing to statewide offices Democrats.
Yeah.
We have fallen a long way since then. Why don't you kick us off with just your overall assessment of how things have gotten to where they are?
Well, politics has changed a lot in the last, say, 20 years, for sure. It used to be like a state like Arkansas, there was a relationship between the elected official and the people that elected them. And even though sometimes, maybe you'd go to Washington and maybe you'd vote a way that like they didn't love, like, for example, when Dale Bumpers, one of our two senators back in the day, when he voted for the Panama Canal Treaty, which was not popular, believe me, but he came home and explained it. And, I think a lot of people said, well, I don't really agree with him, but, I appreciate his conviction on this. And they reelected him. And that's kind of the relationship you had. You worked hard. The people would always keep you on your toes. My father was in politics for 35 years in Arkansas. And, I grew up around it. But what has happened in recent years is, quite honestly, everything has been nationalized. And that relationship just isn't there like it used to be. It's more like, if you have a D by your name, we're going to vote for you. If you have a R by your name, we're going to vote for you, that type thing. And I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that's good for our system. I don't think that's the way our founding fathers set it up. But, there's so many changes in politics. For example, back when I was a kid growing up campaigning with my dad, it was going to the courthouse square. It was shaking hands. It was, meeting with the sheriff and the local elected officials and, him going in and talking to the local chamber of commerce or the local Rotary Club. And, there was retail politics and I love that. And that's in my blood. But right now, if you look at a lot of what you see around the country, that's kind of a lost art. Again, it's about social media. It's about how much these third party groups can spend. It's about candidly, like in the Republican primary, who can be the most conservative, the most strident, who can have the loudest voice. And it's just not good. And, I would love to say we can go back, but I think we're going to have to work really hard to get it back.
It feels to me like, at least in the Republican Party, and keep me honest here, I'm a partisan Democrat, that, but having observed the Republican Party and, grown up around Republicans and still have many Republican friends, the dominant driver in that party is the relationship between the voter and Trump in an almost cultish way. And that filters down so that if Donald Trump disapproves of one of those lower politicians, even a senator, then that is communicated to the voter, and it's the death knell for anyone's political future. That doesn't seem to hold true in the Democratic Party. And the natural conclusion here is that there is a cultish kind of thinking that has overtaken one major American political party.
Well, let me say this about all that, because when I was in office, I worked very, very hard to work with Republicans and have good relations with my Republican colleagues. And back when I was Attorney General in Arkansas, I'll be honest with you, I went to the national Attorney General meetings. I didn't even know who was a Democrat or Republican because I didn't care, truly. I mean, I was in there for like 2 years before I started asking, is he a Democrat or Republican? I mean, I had no idea and didn't want to know because it didn't matter. And so when I get to the Senate, I'm really focused on just trying to be productive and trying to get things done. And I'm one of those that I'm a Democrat, lifelong Democrat. I will be a Democrat till the day I die. But at the same time, I know that Democrats don't have a monopoly on good ideas. And I know that there's some things that the Republicans advocate for that, I think are good, or at least have the germ of good ideas. Let's put them together. Let's find a compromise. Let's do something good for the country and have some unity, So that's very different today. That has changed. The Republican Party has changed fundamentally. And I'll say this, that as a Democrat, I acknowledge that the Republican Party, the grand old party here in the U.S., is one of the great American institutions. I mean, it is. It's been around for a long, long time, since the days of Abraham Lincoln. And it's important to our country, but it has really lost its way. It has changed so much, so dramatically. And you're right in a lot of what you said, in that now Donald Trump dominates that party in a way I think is very unhealthy. We don't have anything like that on the Democratic side, and I'm not sure we ever have. But anyway, that's where we are today. There's also another kind of silent factor in all this, and that is these huge mega donors. Believe me, when I say from firsthand knowledge and working with my colleagues when I was in the U.S. Senate, my colleagues were scared to death about getting a primary opponent. That was the death knell for a lot of them if they got a primary opponent. And so they really were careful not to cross any lines that one of these mega funders might, put in $1 million or $10 million or $50 million, whatever it might be, to beat them in the primary. And so that's a real problem. Money in politics is a huge problem. We really see it on the Republican side. And it's unfortunate. And again, I'm all for working to fix that and try to make it better.
Well, if money in politics wasn't an obvious problem last week, seeing the inauguration and the dais crowded with billionaires, I think someone did the math, adding up the people immediately surrounding Donald Trump and their net worth, and it approached $1 trillion. I don't know how much clearer it could be that we are on the verge, if we're not already there, of entering oligarchic territory.
Well, I saw, there's been a couple of pieces written that have run in national publications, et cetera, about oligarchy in the United States, and it's scary. And, I feel like the average Joe is kind of being shut out of the process. They're being priced out of the process, but also, candidly, the Republican Party is making it harder and harder for people to even vote. And it's really disturbing. And all I can say is I believe in our country. I think we have a great country. I believe in our democracy, our system of government. But we just have to fight for it and preserve it, and for ourselves and our children and our grandchildren.
It's Ken Harbaugh. Quick break to say thank you to everyone who supports this show via Patreon. We're adding exclusive content every week there. So if you haven't signed up yet, head over to patreon.com/Ken Harbaugh. Every single cent we get through Patreon goes back into this show, whether it's researching topics like the piece we recently did on the U.S. Army's counter-fascism training during World War II, or my reporting trips to Ukraine to show what that country is doing to defend its democracy. These episodes can't happen without your support. I'm deeply honored that so many of you have pitched in. If you've been waiting, now would be a great time. We've got another reporting trip to Ukraine coming up and other ambitious projects in the works. We're all in this together. Thanks for everything. You referred to the GOP as a venerable institution. I think I know where you're coming from, but do you think there is any way for the GOP of today to rediscover its values, its roots? I mean, what made my parents Republicans was a strong on national defense party, one that believed in limited government and individual rights, and they're undermining all of that now.
All of those things, they really are. Again, it's not just Trump. I do want to talk about him just in 1 minute, but it's not just Trump. It's a combination of factors. It's all kinds of different things that have kind of come together. Trump has taken advantage of that, and he's been really brilliant, if I can say that word about him, but brilliant about capturing that and basically capturing an entire party. I just think that, anyway, I don't want to get down a rabbit hole, but I do think the Republican Party has lots and lots of problems. And, the one problem that I have with them, candidly, is so many of people I know, people in the House and people in the Senate and governors and other elected officials around the country that are Republican, they just want to whitewash like January 6th, like it didn't happen. And, it's hard for me to see, again, these Republican office holders that are not outraged by these pardons earlier this week. These are people that attacked the United States Capitol. You're talking about the violent overthrow of the U.S. government. That's exactly what they were trying to do. And they killed a police officer and they beat people. It was terrible. And the president pardons them, and then basically it's radio silence. Nobody says a word. It's just a big shrug from the Republicans. It's just never seen anything like it. And I never thought we'd get here.
No, I certainly didn't either, especially on January 6th of 2021, when you had Republicans like Ted Cruz saying this was a domestic act of terrorism. You had Mitch McConnell saying the president is responsible for this. You had Republican after Republican lining up and calling it what it was, and not 2 weeks go by and Kevin McCarthy is bending the knee and every Republican is lining up once again. It's a phenomenon I frankly still struggle to understand. The one silver lining for me, I think, is that it appears to be unique to Donald Trump. I can't imagine another Republican in the party today who could command that kind of fear and loyalty and actually drive people to go to prison for him or risk their lives for him. What's your take?
I agree. I think Trump is unique. I think he has somehow, some way, and I don't understand it, but he has, almost gotten in these people's brains and just convinced them that almost like he's the savior of the nation. And I'm going to tell you, a lot of his followers really believe that. They really, truly believe that. And I don't understand it. It's not rational to me. There's no evidence that he is, or for any of that good stuff that they believe about him. But regardless, that's where we are today. And I do think part of it is that so many of those people, they get their news from only these conservative and in many cases really right-wing news sources. For a lot of these people, Fox News is liberal, and you know it, and that's how it is. But once you refuse to take in information and take in the facts from objective news sources, or a source that, you don't always politically line up with, you're not biased for, that's a problem. You can imagine that's a problem. And so anyway, that's where we are today, though. On the liberal side, we have a little bit of that, but not nearly as much as the Republican side. I'd almost say it's a 90-10 problem. It's 90% on the Republican side. And yes, we have people in America that are Democrats that, watch MSNBC or whatever, but it's just not the same. And people know it's not. Objectively, people can see and know it's not the same.
Well, and the parties reflect it as well. One of my biggest takeaways from the Democratic National Convention was the observation that we nominated a candidate who was a reflection of the party. Yeah. And just the opposite holds true today in the Republican Party. Yeah. The Republican Party is a reflection of Donald Trump. Yeah. And wherever he goes, the party goes. Yeah. Even if he does a 180 on TikTok or American expansionism into Greenland, of all places, in Panama, it almost doesn't matter. His policy positions, the party follows.
Yeah. And, speaking of that, just if we can talk politics for just a minute about and kind of in the context of what you just said, because it has been remade and somewhat remade in Trump's image, What that means to me politically is the middle is wide open. The middle's wide open. And so I don't think you have to fight some of this with being uber liberal. I think you can fight it on Main Street, and you can go to middle America and you can talk to people, business people, and, visit with them about their aspirations and, what this country's all about and the opportunity they get. It's such a great blessing to just have been born in the United States of America. I mean, I felt like I won the lottery, when I was born in this country. And it's so frustrating when I see people like storming the Capitol. And I must say, I'm a little bit of a dinosaur here, but my view on them is either love it or leave it. I'm tired of hearing people just complain about our country all the time, complain about our government. I mean, move to Venezuela. If you think America is so bad, move to Mexico or Thailand. I don't care, but stop complaining about it. And if you think there's a problem, let's work on it constructively together to try to fix it.
Last question. How do you package all of that in a way that can be offered up to Democrats who are trying to solve this and counter the messaging from the right and the juggernaut that is Trump 2.0 with a captured Supreme Court and House and Senate? He's got all the levers of government at his disposal.
Well, what I would say is that, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole because this is a long, long conversation, but the Republicans are better at messaging than we are, and they have been for a long time. And I think one of the reasons they are, honestly, is because they are willing to say things that may not make governmental sense. And I'll give you an example. To me, a great example from 8 years ago that was still with us today is the wall. People that know immigration and understand geography know it is prohibitively expensive to build a wall from, basically, Texas all the way to California. And besides that, it's going through private property. It's going through the middle of towns. I mean, it doesn't make sense. And besides that, it's not even effective. You can go under it, you can go over it, you can go around it. I mean, it's just not effective. So, but what they do is they'll take a position like that and they just drive it and drive it and drive it. And they finally kind of get to a point where say, okay, Democrats, what's your response to that? Or it's like tax cuts. When you look at what Trump did in his first term, between his tax cuts and his increased spending, which by the way, he did both, he added $4.8 trillion to the national debt, $4.8 trillion. And is there any accountability there? Does he acknowledge that he was responsible for that, or do the Republicans in the Congress? No, they don't, because all they talk about is tax cuts. They don't want to talk about what has to go with them if you're going to keep if you're going to get to a balanced budget, and that is spending cuts. When your revenue goes down, your spending needs to go down, but they don't want to talk about that. And it's just like for years and years, they've messaged things like the death tax, and back in the Affordable Care Act days, a government takeover of healthcare, So they've been doing this successfully for a long, long time. They're better at it than we are. Part of that is because, like I said, they are not as interested in governing and as government and, the government working as they are in just getting power. And recently, I think Trump is in a class by himself when it comes to messaging. And this is part of kind of, I think, what you're have alluded to is he has this way of coming up with an issue that may make no sense at all, but he sells it. And I'll tell you the one that's, there's several, but one that's been current in the last couple of weeks, the Gulf of America. That is a brilliant issue because it is so stupid. It's so dumb. Who cares about renaming the Gulf? No one's ever called it the Gulf of America. But anyway, it's something that, now because he's doing that, you're seeing everybody talk about that. And once again, he's able to control the dialogue where people ought to be talking more about like, is this nominee really a good person to be running the Department of Defense? Or is that nominee qualified to hold this job? we're not even talking about much of that anymore. Now we're talking about the Gulf of America. So anyway, he has this ability to do that. And I'll say this about Donald Trump, a couple things. One is, if you think about it this way, the problem is not really Donald Trump. The problem is that people follow him, including the Republican Party. And that's a huge problem when an entire party follows this guy. But it's that people around the country think he's great. They love him. They can't get enough of him. That's very concerning to me because I feel like he doesn't have, even America's best interests at heart, candidly. But a second thing I would say is this. Bill Clinton has just come out with a book called Citizen. I just finished it. It's great. If you hadn't seen it, I'd recommend it for your viewers here. I think it's really, really good. But what he says is, I think, insightful. And he writes in the book that Trump's messaging is not new. It's not new. It's actually just a new version of us versus them. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, that's what it is. It's just us versus them. And Clinton talks about how he grew up in the segregated South in the 1950s and 1960s, growing up in Arkansas. And so he saw that his life, he's had to deal with this us versus them thing for his whole life. And so he knows it when he sees it. So anyway, I think there's a lot of reason for hope. I don't want to give up. I think that Democrats tend to focus, instead of us versus them, think about the last couple of themes in campaigns. Obama said, yes, we can. We can. Hillary said, stronger together. I think Joe Biden's was, let's win this, or maybe that was Kamala's, let's win this, whatever. Let's win this, always doing things together because we know that we're much, much stronger together than we are divided. And I think that there are a lot of people that want to divide us, and we just can't allow that to happen.
Well, that is a hopeful note to end on. Senator, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, it's great to be on. Thank you so much.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Midas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.